Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here for episode 749 with Dr. Tom Curran. If you ever struggle with perfectionism, or you've been told that you do, or you know someone who does, Tom brings the goods. He's one of the leading researchers in the topic of perfectionism. He is a behavioral psychologist with deep expertise, and he's got a lot of practical gems to share with us, including one, why perfectionism is not correlated with performance. Two, the self-limiting beliefs that underlie perfectionism. And three, some tools to combat perfectionism. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we mentioned here, please pay us a visit at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP749. And if you're hanging out at awesomeatyourjob.com, check out some of our goodies like the full text transcripts, which are searchable, as well as the gold nugget email write-up summaries. So you can get just the actionable wisdom that Tom and 700 others had to share in a handy email that go right to you, one at a time on the day of the release. We're not going to send you 700 emails. That'd be lame. But you do get access to the whole vault, so you can check those out on demand at your leisure for all historical episodes. Pretty cool. Let's call the gold nuggets at awesomeatyourjob.com. And here's some pretty cool stuff about Tom. Thomas Curran is a British Psychological Society chartered social psychologist. His primary area of expertise is the personality characteristic of perfectionism, how it develops, and how it impacts mental health. He's the author of over 30 published papers and book chapters on related topics, and has received numerous awards for his scholarship and research. Informed by his research and expertise in data analysis, he has previously lectured to undergraduates in the UK and Australia. He now teaches research methods and statistics units in the Department of Psychological and Behavioral Sciences. Big thanks to Tom for sharing his wisdom with us. Big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. Tom, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, I'm so excited to dig into your wisdom about perfectionism. And I think maybe if you could kick us off with what's one of perhaps the most surprising or counterintuitive or extra fascinating discoveries you've made about perfectionism over the years that you've been researching it?
Oh, that's a really good question to kick us off. I think the most surprising finding that's come out of the work that we've done is that perfectionism has very little correlation with performance.
Okay. Neither good nor bad.
No, there's nothing.
Okay.
0% variance explained. I mean, what we do is we give people questionnaires about their levels of perfectionism, and then we ask them to report various types of performance indicators. It might be, I don't know, if we're looking at education, it's GPA, or if we're in work, it'd be manager ratings or their own bottom line or whatever it might be that we can gather. And when you put all the data together and you look to see if there's an association, what we typically find is that there isn't one. And that was really surprising to me. And that's a consistent finding, by the way. It's something that's found across many, many studies. It's not just one study, but many. Because when you think about how much perfectionism energizes behavior, keeps us moving forward, I suppose, it's really surprising that you don't get the performance benefits from that energy.
Yeah, that's a head scratcher. I cannot begin to guess as to why that is. Can you?
So there's a couple of theories. It's a really staggering finding because we do research in perfectionism and we kind of have these ideas or preconceptions of what we might find when we do the research. And nevertheless, sometimes these sorts of findings come through consistently that really draw your attention and to ask why, what on earth's going on here? So we think two things are going on. The first thing is perfectionists put so much effort in that they go above and beyond. And what I mean by that is they kind of reach a zone of diminishing and then inverse returns. So you have this kind of almost like an inverted U relationship between perfectionism and effort, where the initial amounts of effort that you put in get parallel returns. So the more you put in, the more you get out. But there comes a point where you kind of start to sacrifice things in your life as you put too much effort in. You tinker, you iterate a bit too much, so it kind of waters down or contaminates the quality of your work. And then reach a point where you're sacrificing so much that actually now any additional effort that you put in is actually impacting on your performance. So you might be tired, you might be lack of social and replenishment, might be poor diet, poor exercise habits, or whatever it might be. That these things that have an actual negative impact on you. So we think something like that might be going on. But there's another, and I think more convincing theory, which is essentially that perfectionists actually hold back effort, they don't put it forward. And that's going to sound counterintuitive. But when you think about perfectionism and how they're so wrapped up in this notion that they must succeed and they can't possibly fail, then it's the consequences of failure, the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt that they feel, that means that the next time they put themselves in that situation, they're going to feel those same emotions. So what you typically see is perfectionists will try really hard on the first attempt, but if they fail, then they hold it back on the second attempt, right? And the third and the fourth attempt, because they don't want to put themselves in the positions where they're feeling those negative emotions. So paradoxically, what we think is going on, and we've done some research to actually show that this is indeed the case, is when they're put in situations of challenge, they tend to withdraw. And so this idea that perfectionism actually creates less effort, not more, is something that we think is probably behind that finding. But it's a really interesting finding.
Well, yes, indeed. Well, so, and that, I think your theories, not that my opinion matters to you about your theories, but yeah, that makes some sense, says Pete, the podcaster. So you got that going for you, I guess. Well, maybe then, before we get too deep in here, we should probably have an operational definition that we're using here for perfectionism, perfectionist. How do you define it? How do we know if we are one?
So perfectionism is at root a sense and a belief that we're imperfect. And I think that's probably the best place to start with perfectionism. So how much can you tolerate showing imperfections to the world? Some people can tolerate a lot of that. They don't really mind. Some people find that really tough. and they don't have much tolerance for that. And so the first thing to say is that if you think about perfectionism from that kind of deficit mindset, that idea that I'm flawed and therefore I don't want to reveal those flaws to the world, then there's a certain spectrum to that kind of belief. And you can have a lot of it, or you can have a little bit of it, or you can be more or less in the middle. Most of us have some of it, right? Like we don't totally, want to completely reveal all of our flaws, defects, and imperfections to the world. But as I say, some people are much less tolerant of that, and some people are a little bit more tolerant, and some people are more in the middle. So that's the first thing to say about perfectionism. It really kind of starts at this deficit belief. And then it reveals itself in many different ways. So you have self-perfectionism. So this is kind of need to be perfect. I need to be perfect and I need to shoot for excessively high goals. But it's not just personal characteristic. It's also a sense that other people expect me to be perfect. So there's a social element. So other people and the environment more broadly expects me to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, they're judgmental. And the third part of perfectionism we tend to see is perfection directed outwards onto others, right? So from this deficit mindset, we project our own imperfections and our own need to be perfect onto other people. So I need you to be perfect. And if you're not, I'm harsh and judgmental. So from that deficit standpoint, you see a number of different characteristics, and we call them self, social, and other. And together, those are what we believe are, encompassing perfectionistic characteristics.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what I find intriguing is, when it comes to perfectionism, I have it in very specific domains or arenas as opposed to universally. For example, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the utmost. So if I'm looking at heart rate variability biofeedback training, Tom, by golly, I'm going to get all the gadgets and find the most perfect resonance frequency for my breathing to check it out. Or if we're going to publish a podcast episode, then by golly, I would like the audio to be, hey, in a way, there's no such thing as perfect audio, but I would like any puffs of breath. Like I want that totally eliminated, and not just like mostly eliminated. It's like, I want it. If you eliminated it any more, it would be unnaturally weird and freakish. So I guess I've got some of those in particular domains. What kind of language would you put to that in social psychology land?
I mean, that's what you're saying there is absolutely correct. And it's what most people feel, right? Like, so we know that people are perfectionistic about at least one or two things in their lives, right? Not everything. Everybody has things that they're passionate about. Everyone has a kind of idealized image of themselves. We're not all the same. Some people want to be the perfect teacher. Some people want to be the perfect boss. Some people want to be the perfect parent. Some people want to be the perfect professor. Myself. Mm-hmm. I fail miserably, but I try. In our mind's eye, we have these kind of ideals that we hold dear of the person that we feel like we should be in those domains. And I think that's very common, very consistent. So perfectionism is a broad perfectionistic tendency, but then within that, there are different domains in which perfectionism reveals itself. Those domains depend, I guess, on our own identity and the things that we each hold dear.
Mm-hmm. And so you say just about all of us have at least a dose of perfectionism going. Is that fair to say? Or do we have a rough statistical breakdown of how many people qualify as perfectionists?
We don't have a statistical breakdown, but it's fair to say that this is a spectrum. And I don't like to think about it in terms of a dichotomy, i.e. you're a perfectionist and you're not a perfectionist, right? I think like anything, and this includes all sorts of psychological characteristics and disorders, there's no kind of hard and fast cutoff. I think some people have a little, some people have a lot, most people are more or less in the middle, and we all kind of vary around that mean. And so perfectionism in that sense is something that most of us, if not all of us, have at least a little bit of, right? And we know that from large-scale research projects where we find that most people don't score the very lowest on a scale. There's a little bit in there, even if it's not much. And that can spread all the way up to the very top end of the scale, and it can, as I said, it can fall somewhere in the middle. So I like to think about perfectionism as a spectrum, as something that at some level we can all identify with. And depending on where you are on the spectrum depends on how much of an impact it has on our lives.
And for this deficit belief about ourselves, Can you give us some example verbiage to that in terms of like, I believe that I, like fill in the blank there. Like what does that deficit belief kind of sound like in words?
I believe I'm not enough.
I'm not enough. Like broadly?
But how many times do you hear that? I mean, I see that every day in my job as tutor and mentor to many young people. This sense that no matter what I do, it's not enough, right? There's still something that can be improved. There's more growth to have. There's more improvement to make. There's more development to undergo. And at some level, I am flawed and I am defective, or I'm not good enough at calculus, or I can't give presentations particularly well, or I'm not very good socially in social situations. There's all sorts of areas of our lives where we introspect on and we tell ourselves that we're just simply not enough. And so when I say that perfectionism really begins there, it's what I mean. It's rooted in that sense that I'm not enough. It's rooted in that sense that, I mean, broadly, really what we're talking about here is relational needs. So I'm not enough to be accepted. I'm not enough to matter. I'm not enough to be loved or approved of. Mm-hmm. And that's really like where it's, if you really want to get the root of perfection, that's where it starts. And these, all of these issues around, I don't give very good presentations, are really issues of everyone's going to think that, that was a terrible presentation. And everybody's going to have a negative view of me as a result of that presentation, right? So when we're talking about issues around I'm not a good presenter, what we're really talking about is worries about how other people will receive it and whether they will throw shade, so to speak, over those performances. So that's what I mean by deficit, I think.
Oh, that's very clear and powerful. Thank you. And so, well, it doesn't feel great being in that zone of belief and imagining the negative consequences and ramifications of showing what I can do to a group of people and them finding it to be inadequate. That's a bummer. And so at the same time, though, if we think about people who do want to learn and grow and improve and get better, like what is the happy articulation of one's belief about oneself that, yeah, I think I'm pretty swell fundamentally, but boy, I sure do have a lot to learn and want to develop in these key skill areas. That was a lot of words. Is there a more succinct term or articulation of that belief that it's enough, but it's also striving?
Well, here's the thing, right? We've got to make a distinction. That's the first thing to say, right? Like, so perfectionism is rooted in a deficit thinking that I'm not enough. And so everything from that point onwards is personal. So if we make a mistake, it's personal. If we slip up on a presentation, it's personal. It's an indictment on me. Life is one big court of appeal for my flaws. Mm-hmm. And everything that I do is almost apologizing for those things that I know I'm not good enough at, right? That's perfectionism, right?
All right.
Now, the distinction we need to make between that form, or that characteristic, that way of living, that way of existing, and other more very positive ways of existing, ways of living, ways of going through the world, striving, so to speak. Things like conscientiousness, things like diligence, meticulousness, exactitude. These are all fantastic things. And, often it's the case that people tell me, well, do you not want people to strive? Do you not want excellence? It's not about that. It's not about that at all. Of course I want people to strive. Of course I want people to be excellent. But the difference is that those who are able to remove the personal from the outcome and see the task as the most important thing to improve. What was happened that was wrong was something I did, not something I am. Okay? I did something wrong. I didn't say a certain phrase, or I've coded a piece of code incorrectly. That is an indictment on me as a person. That's just an indictment on a mistake I made, right? And there's a very subtle distinction. But those who are able to strive in that way have far greater levels of performance and satisfaction and contentment than those who have high levels of perfectionism for the reason that really everything's personal.
Oh, okay. Beautiful. So a commitment to healthy excellence is associated with great, good outcomes. And perfectionism has no correlation whatsoever, we learned, associated with performance metrics. And it sure sounds like it feels bad too, in terms of not being pleasant. Can you paint a picture of some of the other ways that perfectionism is potentially harmful for us in terms of our health or relationships or career? Any particularly spooky bits of research or numbers that could startle us?
Well, there's a lot of research. I mean, to suggest, we've done so much research, and certainly I wouldn't take the large credit for a lot. The heavy lifting has been done by others, but across the piece, perfectionism is a very strong and consistent predictor of low self-esteem, cognitive difficulties like rumination and brooding. They tend to self-handicap a lot and procrastinate a lot. You tend to find positive relationships with things like depressed mood and low levels of anxiety, and at the clinical end, just see more pathological problems, but these are sort of more at the extreme end. I'm thinking more hooks here. If we just sort of start to trend higher on the perfectionism spectrum, you start to see some of these negative moods come in. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there's a lot of baggage with perfectionism, and it's not a particularly enjoyable way of living.
Sure. Okay. Well then, what do we do if listeners are hearing themselves in this conversation like, oh shoot, yeah, I totally do that and think that and operate that way, and I'd kind of like to stop. Tom, what's our pathway?
It's like anything, like changing mindsets like this that are very entrenched. It's not easy. I think that's the first thing to say. And so self-compassion at the outset is really important, because breaking down some of these tendencies, and I know this because I'm a perfectionist and I research perfectionism and I teach perfectionism and I mentor people, young people who are perfectionists, and even I still find it difficult to shake some of the tendencies. So this is something that's easy, but that's not to say that it's impossible, and it's not to say that you can manage the symptoms and alleviate them. So one of the things I would say is, first of all, like a radical redefinition of failure and what it means. So failure is not the bogeyman we've mistaken it for, and I think that's the first important thing to say. I know this is very cliched right now, and everybody's talking about how failures should define you. They should be teachable moments. They should be areas of improvement, growth, and development. When I talk about a radical redefinition, I mean a radical redefinition that basically doesn't completely force us to turn failure always into success, or turn failure always into growth and development. We're going to fail all the time. Failure is just a part and parcel of life. It's odds on. It's a regression to the mean. We're going to fail way more times than we're going to succeed. And I think sometimes we just need to be comfortable sitting with that failure, sitting with the anxiety of that failure and the feelings that it engenders. Let it wash through us as a reminder that we are human and we're fallible. And so I think first and foremost, really, it's a shift in perspective, and failure is a big one. And just allowing ourselves to sit next to it is such an important thing. And I know it's difficult. We always want to turn it into something else, but just letting it sit there is really important. And I'd also say we have to remember that the environment around us is structured to promote perfectionistic thinking. And a lot of this isn't necessarily our fault. So work structures are organized to prioritize outcomes. Education systems are there to encourage and engender competition and work ethic. Parenting these days is a lot more expectant. There's a lot more pressure on young people to perform and achieve. So as well as being a personal characteristic, it's also a cultural characteristic. And a lot of the time, it's important to recognize that it's not your fault. There's a cultural context to the way you feel. So also I think that's important. This is all bound up in this kind of self-compassion element, that taking the personal responsibility off yourself and recognizing that there's it's a bigger picture is also crucial. So I'd say for me, those are the kind of key messages that I normally give to young people. And I try to focus them in on what they can do, what's in their control. So things like not looking at grades, not looking at performance metrics, just focusing on feedback, focusing on the task, right? Where did you go wrong in the task? Not where did you go wrong as a person? And how can it be fixed? And what can we do to improve? And seeing these things not necessarily as things that should be catastrophic, but actually things that are really important feedback and information to help us learn and develop, irrespective of what the grade is at the end of the day. So I think, for me anyway, those are the main things that I would say.
Okay, cool. Well, and could you share with us perhaps a story of someone who was able to make a turnaround and what they did and their before and their journey and their after?
And there's many students and young people who have began the university journey, unable to even to open. You mark their work and they're unable to open it. You'll meet them and you say, "How did you get on?" And they say, "Well, I haven't opened it yet. I can't do it." So those that kind of paralysis, that crippling fear of what's behind the curtain and how they're going to interpret that and again, it's all about the personal, right? Like there wouldn't be these concerns if it was just about the task itself, because there's a personal element. That's why people are so reluctant and scared. And I think breaking those things down is really, really important. So I particularly in first year, when the focus is on development, I'll often say that this doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, and it's much more important about feedback. And it's really important you get feedback now, because the sooner you get it, the sooner you can implement change. And if you don't, you can't move forward. So there's a lot of mentoring around rationalizing how those feelings are ultimately holding us back. They're not helping us to move forward. And I've seen many students over the years through a process of just slow counselling have improved their perfectionism and are able to embrace mistakes and finally open feedback as soon as they received it, rather than being petrified. So there's a lot of broad success stories in that sense. I mean, my own story is one of high level of perfectionism leading to burnout early in my career, slowing down, focusing on things that I can control, and having had more success with that approach, being able to let things go than before. So it can be done, and there are definitely there's definitely hope, but it is hard.
And I'm curious, are there any particular tools, mantras, core mottos, beliefs, words of hope we cling to? What are some of the top resources that can help us out when either both acutely when we're directly in the grips of it, as well as long term in terms of building our mindsets associated with this stuff?
I think the first one that's very practical is getting things done and worrying about what later is the kind of idea that done's better than perfect.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I see a lot, and particularly when tasks are very complicated and there's a lot of creativity that's required and a lot of deep thought, students are reluctant, or not reluctant, they find it difficult to start. Starting is the hardest part, so getting just things written down is really tough. So I'll often tell them, and I'm sure this is also an exercise that people can do in the workplace too, but I'll often say, in order to get started, the first thing to do is really just to get writing. And it doesn't matter what it's writing about. Write a letter to your mum, write a letter to your boyfriend or girlfriend, write a letter to your dog. It doesn't matter. Just get some written stuff down. I mean, there's a benefit if it's a lovely message to your mum, because you can send it to her afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But do something, get started, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the thing that you're doing in that moment. But the important thing is to build momentum, and momentum is really crucial in throughput in work. So I often say, if you're struggling to get started, which perfectionists do all the time, then done is better than perfect. Get something done, and then use that momentum to push forward with the task. But it's all about getting your head in the mind space, and perfectionists find that particularly difficult. The other thing I'd say is that perfectionists have a lot of irrational types of thoughts. So there's a lot of musts, have to, should. So I must do this, I must do that, I must be this, I must, and there's they don't leave any grey area or ambiguity for any deviation from that path. It has to be a certain way. And so I would say that when those thoughts start to intrude, it's quite important to write them down. So often, write, if I think it's something irrational, I'm thinking something irrational, I write it down, and then I actually grade it on a sort of 1 to 10. How achievable is this thing actually? So it's a kind of self-reflection exercise that allows you to reflect on the irrationality of the things that you're thinking. And then from there, okay, so what is a much more adaptive way to think about this particular task? Is there a certain message that I want to get across? And it doesn't matter how it's got across. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just matters it needs to get across. Is that a much better goal for me, rather than I must ace it, right? Which leaves no room at all for any. So there's those sort of self-reflective things as well that sometimes I recommend to people. Yeah.
That's good. Tom, tell us, any final do's or don'ts you want to share about perfectionism before we shift gears and hear about some of your favorite things?
Yeah. So, I mean, do embrace failure, crucially. Do be kind to yourself. That's also really important, particularly when things don't go wrong. And things will go wrong a lot. And sometimes things will go wrong for no reason as well. Like for no good reason, you just failed, right? And I don't think we leave enough room in our mind for this idea that sometimes we're just unlucky. Or sometimes something happened to us, but it just derailed us. And that wasn't our fault. It just so happened that we were unlucky on a particular occasion. So first and foremost, just being aware that failure is going to happen and being prepared and ready for it, not letting it derail us is also quite important. A couple of don'ts. Don't get too bogged down in the detail. Sometimes it's important to be meticulous, absolutely. And there are certain tasks and jobs where that's crucial, and I wouldn't want to diminish it. But also, sometimes it's the case that you have deadlines. You need to get things in because there's the next thing coming. And so making sure that it's good enough and being happy with good enough is important. So try not to, on those particular tasks, get bogged down in the detail, iterate, tinker, because you're only going to contaminate and you're only going to get yourself behind. So I think for me, that would be a big one, is to focus on the bigger picture.
All right. Lovely. Now can we hear a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
For me, there's many researchers and philosophers and psychoanalysts whose work has impacted me quite significantly. But the big one, I think, is psychoanalyst Karen Horney. And Karen Horney taught us very vividly about perfectionism and how it's really about kind of shooting for an idealized version of ourselves. One of the things she talks about is how we take on a pseudo self, an idealized self, and we toss aside our real selves to chase this idealized version of who we feel we should be. So I'd probably say Karen Horney's work on moving away from who we really are and trying to chase an ideal is something that's inspired me.
Beautiful. And how about a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
My favorite study is a really nice study showing how perfectionism makes us highly vulnerable to stress. Yeah, so that's the other thing about perfectionism. When we encounter stressful situations, perfectionists tend to be really, really reactive in those situations. And so one experiment that springs to mind is there's a study that basically was just puzzle task, and they had people come into the lab, complete a puzzle task, and they measured their levels of perfectionism. And after the first go at this task, they told them that they'd failed, that basically they hadn't done very well and that they'd failed. And then
imagine it'd be fun to be those researchers.
Yeah.
Hey man, you really blew it. What can I say?
And also they told them before they went in there was a really easy task to do as well.
Oh boy, okay.
Compounded this. Basically what they're trying to do is invoke a sense of acute stress, acute sense that I've failed, I've done something wrong. Mm-hmm. And then after that, they took various different measures of how they felt in that moment, anxiety, guilt, shame. And they found that people who scored higher in perfectionism have especially elevated levels of shame, guilt, and diminished levels of pride after that stressful situation. And then they asked them to do it again. And what's really interesting is once you ask people to do it again, the people who are high in perfectionism just don't try. Because you can't try at something you didn't fail. So you'd see their effort just fall off a cliff. Whereas people who are not perfectionistic, they actually maintain their effort on the second go. So that's showing you really, that study's showing you both sides, like how much negative emotion there is in perfectionism, but also the impact it has on performance.
And how about a favorite book?
My favorite book, again, we'll go back to Karen Horney. Our Inner Conflicts is a really important book. So is The Neurotic Personality About Time. Both crucial texts in terms of understanding why culture creates in us a need to be perfect, a need to shoot for a socially accepted ideal. So I'd say that those two are probably my favorite books, but that does change a lot the more I read.
I gotcha. And a favorite tool, something you use to be awesome at your job?
A favorite tool would be my pen. Mm-hmm. One of the things I really don't like is typing or reading things from screens. And so I still use a lot of printouts, and I still use the humble pen to highlight and spot important pieces of information in it, whether it be a research paper or a piece of data. So definitely my pen, because it helps me identify things that are needed.
Mm-hmm. And a favorite habit, something you do that helps you be awesome at your job?
I try to suck at things quite a lot.
Okay.
Actually, I play guitar, which I really enjoy. That's kind of my creative outlet. But one of the things I can't do is sing. And I got really hung up on that because as you master things, you get quite skilled. And I feel like I'm a relatively good guitarist, but it's so frustrating that I can't sing. Like I can't actually put that skill into some practical use. And so that used to really frustrate me until I realized actually like just sitting there and embracing the fact that I suck at singing and sitting with those anxieties and emotions of sucking at singing is actually quite healthy. So I think a habit for me is doing things that you suck at, because it really does help you perfection.
Yeah. And do you amp up the therapeutic benefit by doing them publicly, or is that counterproductive?
Yeah. Do it in front of my friends and family. That's often very frustrating and annoying for them, but like it's helping me. That's what I try to tell them. This is therapy for me. So.
That's kind of them. And is there a key nugget you share that folks remember? They quote back to you like, "Oh, Professor Tom, you said this."
I think a lot of the feedback that I get is around my perspective on failure and my perspective on radical acceptance of failure. I think a lot of people remember that because essentially, it's kind of hard these days. It's kind of hard these days to not continually think that we need to recycle failure. So a lot of my lectures and a lot of things I teach young people is actually we don't need to recycle failure all the time. Sometimes you can just let it sit with you, and sometimes it's much healthier just to let it sit with you. So I think that would be the thing.
And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
I've got a book coming out next spring. You can go to my Twitter page. We've got all sorts of resources on my website, thomascurran.co.uk. Animation, we've just done some animations on perfection development too. So there's all sorts of stuff you can find on my website or my Twitter account.
Cool. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
My challenge would be to be bold, be courageous, not be afraid, and push yourself. Push the boundaries of what you think is possible. Push yourself into uncomfortable situations where there's a chance that perhaps you might slip up, or there's a chance that you might perhaps be criticized. But just try and be brave enough to sit and let those anxieties and emotions wash through, because the more you do it, the easier it will become. Because the more you push yourself into uncomfortable but difficult but necessarily growth positions, and the more you'll develop, the more you'll grow, and the better you'll do. So that would be my advice.
Beautiful. Tom, this has been such a treat. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Pete. Appreciate that.
Boy, just hearing that one of the top researchers in the field of perfectionism has exhaustively looked at all kinds of stuff and concluded that there is just about no correlation between perfectionism and performance, I think is eye-opening. And really, if you have any resistance, I guess what I'm thinking is sometimes I think we hold on to perfectionism. I do. It's like, well, no, it's excellence and I like excellence. And so, no, this is an asset for me and this fuels me. But no, in fact, it does not. And it's really indeed potentially counterproductive in some ways for happiness, and it does not link to performance. And thusly, we got to really examine, is this about a lack belief, a deficit situation going on? This reminds me of episode 278 with Morten Hansen, who had the mantra in sharing the critical factors separating high and low performers: do less, then obsess. So it's not about being perfectionistic everywhere, but rather only zeroing in on a couple super critical things that you've identified in advance and are in full control of, and recognize strategically that this is an area where we are going to go for extra super excellence, because that is differentiating, it's important, it makes all the difference, there's a good payoff there, as opposed to indiscriminately everything I produce, every document, every email, or everything within a zone I have not predetermined to be strategically vital needs to be perfect, because that is not so handy. Again, great stuff from Tom. The show notes, the transcript, the links to items we've referenced are at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP749. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.